You place her on a pedestal, and from that height, she has no choice but to look down on you. The modern dating landscape has conditioned you to believe that your worth is tied to her fleeting approval, causing you to shrink in the presence of average women. You walk into interactions already defeated, desperate to prove your value to someone who has done absolutely nothing to earn your time. This unearned elevation inflates her perception of reality, making her feel superior simply because you have chosen to surrender your leverage. Today, we destroy that dynamic. You will understand the invisible mechanics that govern these interactions and learn how to permanently dismantle the ego you helped create. The moment a beautiful woman steps outside her door, the world hands her a crown she never worked for. Her reality is instantly flooded with endless notifications, thousands of likes, and a constant stream of men begging for a fraction of her time. This relentless barrage of unearned validation completely warps her baseline of reality. Over time, this artificial inflation convinces her that she operates on a higher plane, possessing every man at her absolute beck and call. This psychological distortion manifests in her very posture and attitude. She walks with a manufactured superiority, carrying an unspoken belief that unless you represent the absolute pinnacle of physical and financial perfection, you're entirely disposable. This ego is not a reflection of her true character, but a direct byproduct of the desperate environment created by the hundreds of men who constantly validate her mere existence. She looks down on you because the masses have trained her to do so. You must ruthlessly dissect this illusion. Her perceived superiority is entirely dependent on the weakness of the men surrounding her. When you recognize that her ego is an inflated bubble sustained by cheap attention, it loses all power over your mental state. You stop viewing her as a prize to be won and start seeing her as an equal participant in an interaction. Stripping away the pedestal is the first mandatory step to taking back your absolute control. Human connection has been stripped of its romanticized facade and reduced to a brutal, calculating marketplace. You struggle because you view your interactions through a lens of raw emotion, hoping that pure intentions will somehow bypass the underlying laws of human behavior. This system does not care about your feelings. It operates on cold, unyielding patterns that repeat themselves relentlessly across every generation and culture. Men blindly navigate this arena, confusing their emotional desires with the strict mechanics of value exchange. When you fight against these natural patterns, acting on impulse rather than observation, you guarantee your own frustration and continuous rejection. You convince yourself the game is broken, when in reality, you simply refuse to learn the rules. Operating on pure emotion in a space governed by leverage ensures you will always be consumed by those who understand the system. Step back and view the structure objectively, stripping away the personal sting of your failures. Expand your view from your immediate surroundings to the broader mechanics of human interaction. Once you accept that dating is a marketplace with defined laws, the confusion immediately fades. You stop forcing attraction and begin aligning yourself with the structural reality, making your presence naturally compelling rather than desperately forced. Your attention is a finite, deeply valuable resource, yet you treat it like worthless currency scattered into the wind. The absolute worst mistake you make happens in the very first seconds of an interaction. You identify an attractive woman and instantly begin hemorrhaging your own value. You shower her with compliments regarding physical traits she was born with, and you agree with every word she speaks just to avoid the slightest hint of friction. By distributing your approval so freely, you actively assassinate your own position in the hierarchy. You broadcast a loud, undeniable signal to her primal instincts that your time is cheap and your standards are entirely non-existent. You communicate that she is inherently above you, and that your highest level of respect requires absolutely zero effort on her part. When your validation is guaranteed, your presence becomes immediately irrelevant. True value is exclusively born from strict restraint. You must hoard your validation and dispense it only to those who demonstrate genuine effort, deep engagement, and reciprocal investment. Let your attention be a scarce reward, not a baseline expectation. This selectivity naturally shatters her unearned ego and forcefully positions you as a man operating with undeniable standards, completely detached from the need for her external approval. The invisible rules governing your interactions today were written millions of years ago on the unforgiving plains of human survival. We are attempting to navigate a digital, hyper-connected world using ancient primal hardware that has barely shifted. Human biology is brutally slow to adapt, meaning the exact instincts that kept our ancestors alive continue to dictate every single swipe, text message, and glance exchanged in modern society. The strategies forged in the past were radically different. Early men sought pure quantity to ensure genetic continuation, bearing almost no biological cost for their actions. Conversely, women faced massive life-altering risks with pregnancy, forcing them to evolve into ruthless, highly selective filters. Their very survival depended on securing strength and commitment. These deeply ingrained drives are why men are still biologically compelled to pursue, while women are wired to continuously test and filter. You must completely stop fighting millions of years of deeply entrenched evolution. Resenting her selectivity is a total waste of your energy. Instead, you must fiercely align yourself with this biological reality. Recognize her filtering mechanism not as a personal attack, but as an ancient program running its course. By understanding this code, you stop operating as the desperate pursuer and start positioning yourself as the rare, grounded resource her instincts are desperately searching for. In the brutal, calculating economy of human relationships, she controls the immediate access to intimacy, but you control the far more powerful and valuable resource, commitment. This fundamental dynamic exists because men and women extract entirely different value at different stages of an interaction. Sex and commitment function precisely like competing currencies on an open exchange. Women instinctively utilize intimacy as a tool to test whether a man is genuinely invested and capable of providing long-term security. Conversely, men frequently leverage the promise of future commitment to unlock immediate physical access. Devastating problems arise the moment you surrender your bargaining chip too early. Most men severely undervalue their own currency, giving away the highest levels of their commitment before she has proven she is worthy of holding it. Your commitment operates in strict levels, starting from the baseline of your focused attention and peaking at absolute devotion. Guard every single tier fiercely. The moment you hand out your focus simply because she is visually appealing, your commitment loses all structural weight. Make her acutely aware that access to your time, your energy, and your future requires her to consistently meet your uncompromising standards today. The modern era has aggressively weaponized human attention. Dating applications and social media platforms have engineered a hyperinflated economy where her digital presence attracts a literal army of desperate, eager suitors. This unprecedented globalized access means she experiences a daily, unrelenting avalanche of validation that completely distorts her perception of reality and wildly inflates her own market value. Because of this massive artificial inflation, her default psychological state becomes one of supreme, untouchable entitlement. She views the endless stream of incoming messages and superficial likes not as genuine romantic interest, but as mandatory tribute paid to a reigning monarch. You enter this arena severely disadvantaged because you're initially perceived as just another flashing notification in a sea of thousands, inherently devalued by the sheer suffocating volume of your competition. To survive and dominate this wildly imbalanced digital marketplace, you must entirely refuse to participate in the blind validation machine. Stop feeding her monstrous ego with mindless digital approval and generic predictable praise. When you actively withdraw your attention from the digital chorus, you instantly differentiate yourself from the desperate masses. Your calculated silence becomes infinitely more powerful, heavy, and intriguing than their deafening, pathetic desperation. Your most devastating and irreversible failures happen before the conversation even truly begins. You see a physically beautiful woman and immediately surrender your psychological leverage by offering unearned excessive praise. You compliment her physical appearance, a genetic lottery she did absolutely nothing to achieve or earn. You nod enthusiastically, agreeing with every single word she speaks just to completely avoid any uncomfortable friction or tension. This reflexive behavior is a massive, fatal psychological miscalculation. By giving her your highest level of approval simply for existing in your presence, you communicate a total, alarming lack of internal boundaries and self-respect. You are loudly signaling that your baseline of respect requires zero effort, effectively announcing that you are fundamentally beneath her. This immediately repels her primal instinct, which is actively searching for a masculine presence that is difficult to acquire and impossible to easily conquer. You must fundamentally restructure how you dispense your approval and attention. Your validation must be locked in a mental vault, given strictly only when she actively invests her energy and intellect into the interaction. Force her to bring actual substance, character, and genuine reciprocal effort to the table. When she suddenly realizes that your validation cannot be cheaply bought with a simple smile or a flip of her hair, her unearned ego shatters, and true, organic attraction is violently forced to build. When confronted with an artificially inflated ego, the tragic default reaction for most men is total, immediate submission. You instinctively act inferior and small. You become overly polite, meticulously cautious, and unbearably, sickeningly agreeable. You soften your voice, dilute your strong opinions, and subconsciously attempt to prove your worth to a person who has done absolutely nothing of substance to earn your respect or your deference. This subconscious retreat is an absolute death sentence for any potential attraction. The exact moment you shrink in her presence, her finely tuned biological radar detects acute, undeniable weakness. This submissive, terrified posture instantly confirms her deeply held, inflated belief that she is stationed fundamentally above you in the social hierarchy. You become a safe, predictable, and ultimately invisible entity, utterly failing to trigger any trace of raw, primal desire. Submission is always a choice born from the paralyzing fear of loss and rejection. You must violently eradicate the desperate need for a favorable, peaceful outcome. Walk into every single interaction with a cold, terrifying willingness to walk away the very moment your boundaries are disrespected or tested. When you finally stop softening your edges and begin standing firmly in your own grounded reality, you project a dangerous, quiet strength that her primal instincts absolutely cannot ignore or dismiss. The other catastrophic, equally destructive response to an inflated female ego is performative, unhinged aggression. Feeling deeply threatened by her perceived superiority, you attempt to forcefully put her in her place. You resort to passive-aggressive insults, direct hostile challenges, or outright abrasive behavior. You desperately believe you're projecting dominance, but you're merely broadcasting your own deep-seated, painful insecurities for the world to see. True, unshakable power never has to announce itself with loud volume or erratic hostility. Aggression is a glaring, pathetic admission that her ego successfully penetrated your mental armor and compromised your baseline. It clearly shows that her behavior deeply affected you, violently forcing you to react. She sees right through this fragile, transparent mask, recognizing it not as genuine masculine strength but as the chaotic, embarrassing flailing of a man who has entirely lost emotional control. Discard the exhausting, pathetic need to aggressively conquer her frame or prove her wrong. True, undeniable dominance is characterized by absolute, terrifying emotional stillness. You do not need to tear her down to artificially elevate yourself. Let her project whatever inflated ego she desires. It should wash over you like water off a massive stone. Your complete, chilling lack of reactivity to her provocations is the ultimate, undeniable display of unbreakable internal authority. Every single interaction you have is an invisible, high-stakes game of psychological chicken. The rules of this brutal marketplace are simple. The very first person to back down surrenders the dynamic entirely and permanently. This happens the exact moment you internally panic, when her tone shifts to ice, or when you frantically justify your actions when no explanation was ever required. It is the exact moment you hesitate out of a paralyzing, suffocating fear of her potential rejection. The very second you surrender in this mental game, the power permanently shifts to her side of the board. She can literally feel the terrified hesitation in your voice and sense the frantic, desperate backtracking in your words. Once she realizes she can intimidate you or alter your emotional state with a simple cold glance or a dismissive remark, she assumes total control. You instantly become a powerless puppet dancing to the erratic, unpredictable rhythm of her shifting moods. You must win this psychological game by refusing to play her version of it entirely. Hold your ground with a terrifying, unbreakable comfort. When awkward silence stretches, let it stretch until it breaks her. When she explicitly challenges your opinion, do not scramble to desperately defend it. People instinctively respect those they realize they cannot manipulate or control. When she clearly senses that her emotional reactions cannot move you, she is biologically forced to concede the high ground. Success with women is nothing more than a state of mind. She feels exactly what you feel internally. If you walk into a room feeling inferior and desperate, she immediately feels superior and distant. If you remain deeply centered, intensely grounded, and completely unmoved by her presence, she feels the crushing weight of that reality. You project your internal architecture outward, and she absorbs it completely without a single word being spoken. If your core is shaking with anxiety, no amount of rehearsed verbal game will mask that pathetic vibration. You must aggressively forge a mindset that remains entirely indifferent to her shifting moods and artificial superiority. The realization of unbreakable emotional boundaries is terrifying to an inflated ego. People instantly and instinctively respect you the very moment they realize they cannot intimidate or control you. When a beautiful woman suddenly senses that her usual dramatic reactions don't move you an inch, she is forced to assume you possess a significantly higher value. This is exactly why certain men effortlessly succeed. It is not because they are inherently special, but because women inherently know they cannot be manipulated, controlled, or emotionally shaken. You must become a totally immovable object in a pathetic world filled with frantic, hyper-reactive men begging for scraps of attention. You must completely reframe the power dynamic from the inside out. Your true status is not defined by the clever words you desperately try to say, but entirely by how you strategically respond, or more importantly, how you choose not to respond. When she finally realizes that her physical beauty cannot buy your panic or command your focus, her entire framework of superiority violently collapses. You must cultivate a silent, incredibly heavy presence that forcefully demands respect without ever having to ask for it. The truly unmoved mind is the absolute ultimate weapon against an inflated female ego. forcing her to desperately reevaluate her own standing whenever she steps into your imposing presence. You must understand the brutal definition of implicit status. So how do you actively show high status without resorting to pathetic bragging or loud arrogance? By being radically and completely non-reactive to her environment. True, undeniable authority never has to frantically announce its presence in a room. When you try to explicitly state your value to a woman, you instantly and permanently erode it. You must internalize that true status is communicated purely through your attitude and your unwavering internal conviction. It is the quiet, terrifying, unspoken understanding that you are the ultimate prize in the interaction completely, regardless of her physical appearance or social standing. You must fiercely avoid the pathetic trap of verbal justification at all costs. When faced with disagreement, a low-value man instantly reacts. He endlessly justifies his actions, explains his thoughts, and desperately defends his opinions to secure her fleeting favor. In stark contrast, a genuinely high-value man does absolutely nothing. He doesn't need her external approval for his preferences, and he certainly doesn't need her agreement to feel secure in his own masculine reality. The exact moment you frantically justify yourself to a woman, you broadcast a loud, undeniable signal that her opinion matters significantly more than your own. You must relentlessly embody this silent, unyielding hierarchy in every single interaction. Establish your dominance implicitly through your terrifying absolute comfort with awkward tension. When she aggressively attempts to pull you off your emotional center, let the deafening silence stretch until it physically breaks her. Do not ever attempt to fill the void with nervous laughter or frantic, pathetic explanations. Let your absolute lack of a defensive, panicked response be the only brutal answer she ever receives. This implicit, chilling demonstration of power violently disrupts her expectations, forcing her to recognize she is dealing with a man who completely and totally owns his own internal reality. You have been endlessly conditioned to believe that every single action requires an equal and opposite emotional reaction. In the brutal marketplace of human interaction, that weak instinct will completely destroy you. The absolute highest status response you can ever deploy is no emotional response at all. This is the terrifying void of absolute non-reactivity. It is a deep, suffocating space where all of her entitled provocations go to instantly die. When she aggressively pushes, fully expecting you to crumble or explode in anger, and you offer absolutely nothing in return, you violently short-circuit her entire behavioral programming and leave her scrambling for a foothold. You must master the intricate, cold mechanics of this emotional void. True non-reactive communication is characterized by total, chilling emotional flatness in the absolute face of immense pressure. There is absolutely no dramatic escalation, zero frantic justification, and absolutely no internal emotional shift whatsoever. When an entitled woman clearly sees that her compliments do not artificially inflate you, and her sharpest criticisms do not physically or mentally shake you, she is forced to assume something incredibly important. She instinctively and biologically assumes that you are profoundly, dangerously grounded in your masculinity. You must ruthlessly harness the immense, terrifying power of doing absolutely nothing. Truly grounded men are exceedingly painfully rare in today's weak, hyper-reactive society. This deep, unshakable void violently signals pure confidence, unbreakable inner stability, and undeniable, raw high status. You're not desperately trying to win her fleeting approval, and you're clearly not terrified of losing it either. You simply exist as a massive, solid boulder that her erratic emotional waves violently break against. That calm, deeply unshakable presence is precisely the magnetic force that violently draws her out of her ego and directly into your reality. You must understand the insidious, constant nature of the test. She will continuously throw out statements expertly designed to probe the absolute integrity of your masculine frame. She might casually insult your choices, claiming you would look much better wearing something else, fully expecting you to instantly react and desperately explain yourself. If you defend yourself, she has successfully, effortlessly controlled your emotions with a single trivial sentence. Even attempting to fix this failure by saying something defensively edgy, like claiming you're not trying to impress her, is still deeply, pathetically reactive behavior that proves she penetrated your armor. You must master the precise clinical anatomy of emotional deflection. True deflection requires you to calmly acknowledge the test without ever absorbing a single ounce of its intended impact. Perfect non-reactive communication looks exactly like this. You simply thank her for the suggestion, and then you seamlessly, indifferently continue the conversation as if nothing monumental just occurred. Or when she throws a superficial compliment your way, you simply accept it with a brief thanks and move on immediately without lingering. You completely strip the power from her words by aggressively refusing to engage with the underlying disrespectful challenge. By utterly refusing to defend your existence, you actively and aggressively train her out of her inflated, unearned entitlement. You are absolutely not playing a desperate, pathetic game to endlessly impress her, Nor are you playing an erratic, aggressive game to physically dominate her. You're simply terrifyingly being. When her relentless tests consistently and totally fail to penetrate your cold armor, her inflated ego aggressively starves. She quickly realizes that her standard, predictable methods of emotional manipulation are completely useless against you, forcing her to violently abandon the unearned pedestal she arrogantly placed herself on. You must recognize the brutal, uncompromising true value of your intense focus. Your attention is the absolute most potent currency you possess, yet you pathetically bleed it out to anyone with an attractive face and an inflated sense of self. You must violently realize that your attention and approval are absolutely not free. They are incredibly valuable, strictly finite resources. Here's a brutal, unforgiving truth most men are actively shielded from. Just as you are absolutely not entitled to her body or her intimacy, she is completely unentitled to your attention, your valuable time, or your masculine approval. You must enforce the absolute, ruthless necessity of earning your presence. These crucial, heavy elements of your existence must be rigorously and consistently earned through her tangible actions. Your attention should be given strictly and exclusively only to women who actively invest real effort in you, who genuinely engage, contribute meaningfully, and show clear, undeniable interest. When your attention becomes intensely, brutally selective, it suddenly becomes vastly, undeniably valuable. Conversely, when it is given freely and desperately to any woman who asks, it becomes utterly meaningless, cheap, and utterly pathetic. You must weaponize this as the ultimate, unforgiving filter in your life. This ruthless, cold selectivity naturally and effortlessly keeps her arrogant ego completely and totally in check. It violently repositions you as a massive, high-value man operating with terrifying, uncompromising standards, rather than a weak, desperate man constantly seeking her external validation. True, undeniable value is always created by intense, unyielding restraint, never by pathetic excess. When you absolutely master the heavy weight of your selective attention, you force her to bleed effort for your presence, permanently reversing the dynamic and shattering the illusion of her superiority. You have been totally brainwashed into believing that capturing her attention requires an exhausting, never-ending performance. You operate like a frantic entertainer, constantly trying to explicitly showcase your wealth, your perfectly rehearsed humor, or your social status, desperately hoping to catch a fleeting, momentary glimpse of her approval. This performative behavior is inherently pathetic because it screams of deep, unresolvable insecurity. It loudly and undeniably signals to her primal instincts that you do not fundamentally believe you are enough as you are, and that you must aggressively prove your worth simply to justify taking up space in her environment. The psychological impact of this frantic performance is absolute disaster. When you desperately attempt to impress her, you actively place her in the role of the ultimate judge, handing her the terrifying power to accept or instantly reject your entire existence. She feels the nervous energy radiating from your desperate attempts to entertain, and it forcefully repels her. Women do not deeply desire a man who works relentlessly to impress them. They crave a man whose mere silent presence is so incredibly dense and heavy that it commands absolute respect without a single rehearsed trick. You must aggressively discard the pathetic urge to perform and immediately cultivate a deeply grounded presence. Your profound value is not found in the chaotic things you desperately try to do, but in the immovable nature of who you fundamentally are. You become the absolute anchor in the room, remaining perfectly still while the chaotic waves of the environment crash harmlessly around you. When you replace frantic, desperate action with chilling, undeniable stillness, she is violently forced to step into your reality, rather than watching you foolishly dance for a place in hers. Your entire internal hierarchy is dangerously corrupted. You have inherently placed physical beauty at the absolute pinnacle of your mental framework, automatically subordinating your own goals, your self-respect, and your valuable time to any woman who possesses it. This internal betrayal is precisely why you physically and mentally shrink in her presence. You cannot possibly project undeniable strength outward when your own mind has already surrendered the high ground, declaring her superior before a single word has ever been spoken. You are entirely defeated by your own corrupted programming. Look closely at the men who built empires and violently shaped history. Their absolute highest priority was never the fleeting, unpredictable validation of a woman. It was their uncompromising mission and their ironclad self-respect. When a man's internal hierarchy is correctly aligned, he views female attention as a passive byproduct of his excellence, never the ultimate desperate goal. The moment you elevate a woman above your own fundamental purpose, you lose her profound respect, and far more tragically, you entirely lose the respect you owe to yourself. You must violently tear down this corrupted mental structure and rebuild your internal hierarchy from the ground up. Your unyielding mission, your uncompromising boundaries, and your raw self-respect must permanently occupy the highest, untouchable position in your mind. When you finally structure your internal world correctly, her artificial ego becomes entirely irrelevant to your existence. She is no longer a superior judge looking down upon you, but merely a temporary guest attempting to gain entry into the incredibly valuable, intensely guarded fortress of your reality. Your most fatal instinct in the dating marketplace is the terrifying, uncontrollable urge to continuously and desperately overinvest. The precise moment you sense the slightest hint of potential connection, you completely open the floodgates, violently drowning her in excessive messages, unearned emotional depth, and your total pathetic availability. This severe lack of restraint instantly and permanently suffocates the interaction. You are actively trying to aggressively force a bond through sheer volume, entirely failing to realize that raw human attraction absolutely requires vast space to breathe, wonder, and build dangerous organic tension. You must fully understand the devastating psychological weight of everything you choose to leave unsaid. When you eagerly lay all your cards on the table immediately, you destroy the fundamental mystery that fuels primal desire. A woman's attraction thrives in the dangerous, unknown shadows of your restraint. When she does not completely know where she stands, when she cannot easily predict your next move, her mind is forced to aggressively work to figure you out. This mental investment is the absolute foundation of deep, unbreakable attraction. You must ruthlessly deploy restraint as your most unforgiving filter and your ultimate weapon. Hold back your words, violently restrict your availability, and let silence do the heavy lifting in your interactions. Make her actively earn every single layer of your personality and your time. By mastering this cold, calculated restraint, you instantly separate yourself from the pathetic masses of overly eager men. You project a terrifying, undeniable abundance, proving that your life is already completely full, and she must violently fight to earn a small space within it. The brutal difference between an inferior man and a dominant presence is measured in mere milliseconds. When an inflated ego attempts to aggressively provoke you, the weak man instantly snaps back with a desperate, frantic reaction, entirely driven by burning insecurity. A truly grounded man operates on a completely different temporal plane. He utilizes the terrifying power of the intentional delay. He looks at her, processes the disrespectful statement with absolute emotional flatness, and intentionally lets the heavy silence stretch before delivering a calm, entirely unaffected response. This calculated, deliberate delay is a psychological masterclass in absolute frame control. It violently signals to her primal brain that your internal emotional state is not tethered to her erratic behavior. The delay completely strips the momentum from her attack, forcing her to awkwardly sit in the uncomfortable void she just created. When your response finally arrives, stripped of all anger, justification, or panic, it lands with the crushing, undeniable weight of true authority. She realizes instantly that she is striking a solid iron wall with a fragile glass hammer. You must completely overhaul the fundamental anatomy of how you interact under intense pressure. Stop rushing to desperately fill the silence and entirely stop reacting to her erratic emotional spikes. Slow down your physical movements, significantly lower the pitch of your voice, and aggressively maintain unbroken eye contact without a single trace of defensive hostility. Respond with the deep, terrifying calm of a man who possesses absolute abundance. This unbreakable rhythm completely shatters her unearned ego, forcing her to submit to the overwhelming, undeniable gravity of your frame. You have been entirely conditioned to believe that her physical beauty is the ultimate prize in the marketplace and that you must sacrifice everything to attain it. This is the most destructive lie you have ever been sold. The absolute, undeniable truth is that your masculine commitment, your provision, and your long-term loyalty are the rarest and most valuable assets in the entire equation. You are the ultimate prize, yet you continuously, pathetically attempt to trade your gold for her cheap, easily accessible copper. The harsh evolutionary truth is that countless men can desperately offer her brief attention, but very few possess the terrifying capability to offer genuine, high-value commitment. When you finally recognize the immense, crushing weight of your own currency, you completely stop handing it out to women who simply exist. An inflated female ego expects your absolute devotion as a baseline requirement. Completely free of charge, you must violently shatter this expectation by making it undeniably clear that your commitment is locked behind a massive, impenetrable wall of uncompromising standards. You must ruthlessly guard your kingdom, never surrender your highest level of commitment until she has bled effort to prove her character, her loyalty, and her genuine reciprocal desire. Let her inflated ego aggressively starve in the absolute absence of your unearned validation. When she finally realizes that your ultimate prize cannot be manipulated, demanded, or cheaply bought with physical allure, she is violently forced to drop the arrogant facade. Only then, from a place of absolute grounded power, can you choose to invite her into your reality on your own uncompromising terms. Your entire reality changes the exact moment you realize her inflated ego is nothing more than a fragile mirror, reflecting the weakness of the men who blindly worship her. Stop participating in the desperate, pathetic economy of unearned validation. When you ruthlessly withdraw your attention, master the terrifying void of non-reactivity, and aggressively guard your ultimate commitment, you permanently break the illusion of her superiority. She will no longer look down on you because you have finally positioned yourself completely out of her reach. This is the brutal truth of the marketplace. If you're finally ready to stop bleeding your power and start ruling your own reality, hit subscribe. We are just getting started.